defense. I'm curious what your take on this, because it feels like obviously when the Celtics shoot more than 40%, there's that stat where they're like 38-2, and when they're under 40%, they're like 29-31. I think a lot of this comes from their defense really getting them feeling comfortable, because now they can just let it fly without worrying about having to hit every single shot to counterbalance what the Heat are going to do. They can just kind of out physical them.
Yeah, and we mentioned this a little bit before, right? Like it's the Celtics defense is a coaching thing, because although they don't have a premier like perimeter defender, and I guess they do have Rob Williams, and like obviously Marcus Smart's a great perimeter defender. You could definitely say he's a premier perimeter defender. I feel like we kind of disrespected him on the last podcast by not mentioning him in that conversation. But there's a difference between like a Marcus Smart and like a prime Kawhi or prime Paul George defensively, where they can be 6'8", and a lot more defensive havoc is coming from those types of players, right? And I thought the defense last night was amazing. Specifically, Rob Williams isn't starting anymore, and Rob Williams is playing like 20 minutes a game now. And that's usually the guy I felt like has been the biggest part of their defense over the last few years. But specifically in this series, it's looked like Al Horford is way more switchable, way better defensively almost as a whole than Rob Williams, which I think is pretty fascinating. Which makes, Derek White starting in front of Rob Williams totally okay. I do think there is some interesting stuff happening with Miami in terms of their bench offensively. Haywood Highsmith, Caleb Martin, and Duncan Robinson all came off the bench and all had great games last night. And if I'm Miami, like I think our bench can outscore their bench, and then we just need one of these two games, the starters, to just hold their own against the Celtic starters, right? So I think there are good things happening on both sides. But if I'm Boston specifically, right, like Rob Williams played 20 minutes last night, was plus 10. I almost feel like maybe he's earned more leeway to more minutes. And that's really good for them, right? Because if you can play Rob Williams also off the bench like 25 to 30 minutes a game, you're really limiting some of the other scrubs on the Boston's bench who have to come in the game, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that's been like a really great sign is the Celtics defense. I also wonder if there's just a little bit of a talent gap offensively. Now, especially with the Gabe Vincent and Tyler Hero injury, I just wonder if Miami has the firepower to put up 120 like they did earlier in the series, like in Game 3, where they put up 130. Like, I don't know if Miami's ever going to drop 130 again in these playoffs, So that's a little bit interesting. But Boston's got to capitalize. I mean, they've got a shot here.
Yeah, they have a shot. And to your point, it's tough for Miami to naturally get to there. When they're able to play very freely, like we've been seeing in the first, especially games 2 and 3, when they were just playing so free, passing the ball consistently. The Celtics, it's also on the Celtics too. Like the Celtics weren't really hanging their hat on defense, and they're finally kind of getting down to it on defense. One thing that you were saying that raised my mind was thinking about Jason Tatum is, I think Jalen Rose said this, or Channing Frye might have said this. He does all this like dribbling and sometimes to no avail. And so when he's
much,
and it's impressive, but when he actually like turns a dribble into a move and does something with it and rises up and shoots it or just drives to the hole, like when he dunked all over Caleb Martin in the first quarter, that was beautiful. That was what we needed to see from the Celtics early on, setting the tone, setting the pressure. I think to your point as well, as long as we can play great defense, that's going to be something that really slows down Miami. Like we by default, we need to play good defense, and we don't need to have an amazing offensive night. We just need to be able to play really, really good defense, and the threes will fall. I think the better our defense has been, it's shown even with last year when our defense is rolling, when we're able to get out in transition and not kind of walk the ball up the court after another made shot on the opposing side. We're able to kind of spread the floor quicker. The defense hasn't set. We have more open shots. We have more chances to drive to the lane. And then people can see the ball go through the net and they feel more comfortable and confident. So I agree with you in terms of the talent gap, especially because we do have 4 guys who scored over 20 points last night, and neither of the 2 leading scorers were Tatum or Brown, even though they both had solid games in and of themselves. But that really goes to show what this team can do.
Yeah, honestly, I thought it was not a great Tatum game, just visually. like in the third quarter, it's like getting a little bit closer. And he does like this dribble package move, like size up at the top of the key, and then just chucks it with a right hand into a Miami like defender, right? Like and like doing stuff like that. And it's just like you're saying, like if he puts together those moves and goes to the hole, it looks great. But sometimes he just pounds the rock into the ground and then turns it over. It reminds me of Jordan Poole. Like, sorry, another Warriors reference, but it's like a little bit like it looks great, but it's like when you put it together, it looks amazing, but when you don't, it looks terrible. So it's like, kind of that in the middle ground. I also love Tatum, right? I think Tatum is like better than KD. Obviously, I've said this many times. I'm a Tatum believer. Sorry, and I think he'll be fine. And if anything, if you win one of those like kind of mid Tatum games, that's a good sign.
That's a
Um,
great.
yeah, that's a great sign. Something I did, and you watched the game, obviously. I want to get your take on this. I think there's something weird happening with Bam, and the Celtics defense on him, where they're kind of very willing to give Bam offensive actions, whether that's post ups or him even just catching the ball at the free throw line. They're much more okay with that than they were at the beginning of the series. Because when Bam's doing that and he's kind of attracting more attention, a lot of other people can score off him. But I thought last night they kind of were like, Bam, if you want to cook, let's see it. Let's see you drop 40. And it's Bam. He's not going to be dropping 45 or something. So there's that. But I really thought that opened up a lot of the game for them. And it kind of just changed the pacing of the game. You just got to try stuff out, right? By the time you get to game 5, game 6. And I thought that really worked. And against like the Cavs, for example, like or like not the Cavs, I guess a better example is like the Knicks. Bam can really just crash the boards. They don't have like the Knicks didn't have perimeter defenders to really hardcore limit the Miami's perimeter scoring, right? But for Miami to get to a 120 point game in this series, Bam needs to have 30, you know? And so Bam's role in that Knicks series is really to facilitate, to crash the boards, to play defense. But in this series, he's going to have to score a little more, which plays perfectly into the Celtics' hands, who do have really good big man defenders. And they can just one-on-one Bam in the post. When New York, if Bam's going to work on Julius Randle, now the rest of the defense has to react a little bit more, because that's what they were doing. They weren't putting Mitch on Bam that much. They were kind of using Mitch as a free safety, but all those matchups I think are very interesting, and I think it really plays into Boston's hands, especially with Gabe Vincent being hurt.
Totally. I noticed that a lot too. There was a moment in the game. Do you remember when Bam didn't have anywhere to go with it, and so he finally took the shot and heaved it and went high off the glass and in? Which, to his credit, great shot. I think that was definitely an on-purpose shot. Like I think he took it with that angle because he knew that was going in. That just went to show how difficult it was for him to score. And I agree with you. Telling him, okay, fine, you do it. We'd rather have you score 25 than have all these guys score 15. Let's have them all each score 10 points because they can't get the ball. And obviously 3 is more than 2. So like you're saying, when we have to have 2 come to double team Bam, then it leaves everybody else open. Then the Heat get rolling. He felt a little bit uncomfortable in that position, I thought, too. Like weirdly, like a little bit of shuffling his feet.
Absolutely.
He had a couple of turnovers called on him, like when he was in the post. I don't remember, but he just didn't look like he was comfortable, even though he is typically pretty comfortable in that like face up or like back down, like 8 to 10 foot range. He can be pretty lethal from there. So when he gets going, it's pretty terrifying to see. But also, he can completely turn that faucet off. And then I'm like, all right, Bam, shoot it. Like it's just going to miss and roll off the rim. So definitely if Bam has a 35-point game because he's just the master of like the short mid range and can cook us, then hats off to you, Bam Adebayo, for knocking the Celtics out.
And also, like, since he's shooting twos, like last night, for example, I think he shot over 50%, I think, from the floor. But if you're shooting twos in a playoff game, you need to be making 60% of your twos, 65% of your twos, right? Like like you're saying, 3 is more than 2, right? So the efficiency on your twos has to be so high. And specifically just rhythm wise, also, if a guy takes, 17 twos, or if he makes 17 twos, but took 30 of them, even if that's pretty efficient, you're going to take it, because that's kind of ruining the rhythm of the offense for everyone else. I think you specifically saw this with like Kevin Love and like other guys like that who kind of got didn't play very much last night. Like Max Strus didn't play very much last night just because the rhythm was off with that whole starting group. Obviously Bam's still good, right? Bam still had a good game. I know he was minus 15 on plus minus, but it was still like a good game. But you need great Bam games, especially if Boston's defending like this.
Totally. And like you said, a great Bam game also involves him distributing the ball and getting the rest of the offense involved. And there's something to be said for, even if he's making these shots, if it's very slow defense, like if it's a slow half court possession where they're running down most of the clock, dribble, post up, eventually, then he puts in a shot. It really does take a lot of these other guys out of their rhythm because they are still role players and they do still need to have a chance to see the ball and let it fly and let it rip. And obviously all these guys are professionals. Kevin Love is professional and champion. Kyle Lowry is a professional and champion. Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, even though he didn't play, Caleb Martin, they're all professionals. That being said, they are still role players and it's helpful for them to get involved in the offense. So standing around watching a long possession that results in a 2 eventually is definitely different than like zip, pass around, even pass it around to Bam in the paint, who's able to draw a couple, look around, pass it back out. Duncan Robinson, 3 swish. I'll take a Bam rolling around the rim and dropping in even more so than this like team offense that can be absolutely terrifying to watch.
Yeah, it's like if Bam's going to take 23 seconds to make a 2, even if he makes it, honestly, you're kind of okay with it. You know, like at some point you feel like you're going to get the better end of those. Also, Bam, like 3 assists last night. It is like, it's just a little bit funny to me. I remember him like a few years back, averaged like 5 or 6 assists a game for a whole regular season. And he's still like a great big man distributor, in my opinion. But he's not like, I thought at that point in time he was going to have a chance to become like a Sabonis level distributor as a big man, and he didn't really take that step, which is fine. But then in a playoff series like this, if he's not distributing the ball major in one-on-one matchups, like, and he's not scoring major in one-on-one matchups, it's gonna be a little interesting for the flow of their offense. I think that is one of the bigger flaws with Bam. Like, I don't want to be the guy who roasts someone for having no bag, but like Bam doesn't really have like the greatest bag. Not that I think that's a big deal, but just in terms of that metric. And I think that's really going to hurt them. Also, like, not a great Jimmy Butler game, but it kind of felt like, you know, Jimmy did what he needed to do for the first few games. You're kind of hoping he can coast for one of these and potentially steal a win, and you couldn't.
Yeah.
So now you're back to hoping for another big Jimmy Butler game, but you know.
Well, right. And another thing to your point is, looking at all the box scores, nobody really shot the ball poorly for the Heat. I mean, they shot over 50%. Even Jimmy Butler shot 5 of 10. He didn't have too many turns. He had two turnovers. Duncan Robinson was 7 of 10.
Friggin' Bam had 6 turnovers. Bam had 6 turnovers, for example.
Right, right. And that was the key difference, right? I think the turnover differential of 16-9. Did you get the points off of turnovers? Because I think that was a pretty big margin as well.
Didn't catch it, but even just 6 turnovers, I mean, we can assume just pacing of your offense is like basically chalked by that point, you know?
Totally.
I agree with your point, though. I did think it was interesting. Again, as much as it's kind of looked bad over the last 2 games with Miami, they still clearly have 8 guys they can play in the series, despite all the injuries, etc. Like, and that's always like, you know, you kind of just need bodies by the end of the playoffs, right? It's kind of becomes a war attrition like that, and you're hoping your stars can pull you over the edge with all the role players. And Miami kind of still has that formula going. I mean, you know, Haywood Highsmith played 36 minutes and he played great. Like, you know, that's their 8th guy. That if I'm Miami, I'm not tweaking yet.
Yeah. I mean, you love to see that guy that gets hot at the end of a game where you're not winning, and then they're seeing the ball go through the net, and they're like, okay, cool, we have another guy now who can step up in this elimination game.
Well, he played 36 minutes too. It wasn't just at the end of the game. I mean, he was out there for like majority of the game. Was he scoring like all game? Like, obviously not, but like you know, even at the end of the game he was scoring, and he's able to take up minutes. You just need like I need you to play 5 minutes on Tatum right now, and hopefully like you could do something. And also Haywood Highsmith was really good in the regular season. I was actually kind of surprised we didn't see more of him specifically throughout the playoffs. Obviously Miami has so many role players, it's tough to like allocate minutes, but I think he's really good. And if he's your 8th man at this point in the playoffs, like, I like him better than Jeff Green probably. And, you know, that's Denver's 8th man. He might even be the Denver 7th man, you know, so that's kind of like
right.